Welcome back to the Philly Film Room podcast. Preseason is officially over, so that means two things. Number one, we have to get to the cut down roster. Number two, Eric has finally ended his holdout and he has shown up for work again. So, Eric, what's going on, man? Where you been at?
So I've been in the Philippines for a few weeks. It's been great, just to kind of take a break from all this film watching, reset before the season. Obviously, I didn't pick up a tan there, but I had a great time. But I'm very excited to be back. It's been almost a month since I've been on the podcast, so it hopefully some of the audience has missed me. You've done a tremendous job in the interim. I watched all the videos, very very well done. But yeah, very excited to kick it off before the season.
Yeah, well, we are happy to have you back. And how was getting the updates all the way in the Philippines? I mean, it must have been like 2 a.m. when practice was going on. Could you even sleep at that time?
So it was 15 hours offset from my normal time zone. So I definitely was up at some strange times watching some football. Um, so it's not like I completely logged off. Pretty much no matter what time of year, I'm going to keep an eye on what's happening. So it was definitely a trip overseas. I actually learned that flag football is like burgeoning over there in Philippines, and they have some good players. I watched a practice, so it's a global game, and that's a perfect leading into our week one against Brazil and playing in Brazil. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, so, speaking of week one, we have to figure out who's going to even be on the 53-man roster getting to week one. Now, the initial cut down on who's going to be on the 53-man roster is a little bit of a game trying to, you kind of put guys on injured reserve or the pup list, and you kind of try and hide guys here and there so you can sneak some other guys on your roster who you don't want to subject to waivers, but you're not really sure if they're going to play a huge role for you this season. I think the Eagles have a number of guys like that this year. So we'll get into that. But starting with who we have on the 53-man roster, jumping to quarterback, I think this is a pretty cut and dry one. Jalen Hurts, Kenny Pickett, Tanner McKee. Do you have any differences there, Eric?
No, that's what I have. And just a quick note, if you do keep a third quarterback, essentially by the NFL game day roster rules, you get that third quarterback for free. So they'll definitely have three dressed on game day, and the three you mentioned.
Yep.
Probably one thing I will talk about real quick is the order. A lot of people in preseason have been harping on McKee being the number two. I think in that last preseason game, you saw a lot of the warts of his game. One of the reasons he was not highly acclaimed coming out of the draft was he was considered a statue, which you could see that at times. Now, in terms of pure arm talent, it's there, but I definitely think Pickett it has the number two job for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And also, even if he wasn't going to be the number two anymore, why did the Eagles come out and say that? If you think McKee is good enough to be your number two, I imagine they'd probably want to try and trade Pickett away as well at that point in time. Why would you tell the world that Pickett's not good enough to be a backup quarterback in this league? He loses a lot of value at that point in time. So now jumping to running back, again, I think this one's pretty cut and dry. Saquon Barkley, Kenny Gainwell, and Will Shipley. I will say I had early in the preseason, I was pretty intrigued by Kendall Milton. Thinking about it and the rest of the roster and other guys that you got to try and fit in, I think Milton's a guy that you're going to drop down and try and get back on the practice squad. He should make it back on the practice squad as well, looking at it. So I just don't think he has a robust enough game to that's worth keeping on the initial cut down roster. If Barkley were to go down and get injured, I think he provides a different dynamic than what Kenny Gainwell and Will Shipley can provide. But I don't think, with a healthy roster, he's a guy that's going to make the 53-man, initial 53-man cut. What about you, Eric?
I agree. It's doubtful that he would be claimed, and as we get into the rest of the roster, the math just is not shaking out for them to keep four running backs. Now, if you told me he dressed a few games this upcoming season, Would I be surprised? No, I wouldn't. Especially because some of those running backs maybe have some health concerns. So I could see. Now, the other thing I should mention is he might not even be the first one in line to get called up. Um, we both like him. I think he showed a lot of the things that we thought he would show based off his college tape, um, which is he's kind of like a bruiser who can get some yards after contact kind of by falling forward. And there's a place for that. But yeah, I don't think, I think we'll just run with 3 running backs to start out with.
Yep. So jumping to receiver, pretty cut and dry. The first 3: AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Jahan Dotson. Newcomer Jahan Dotson. I guess since you haven't been back on the pod, did you have any thoughts on Jahan Dotson joining this receiving core?
Yeah, I'm very happy about it. Less of a I guess praise about how good Dotson is and more of an indictment about the lack of great options we had prior to the trade. For what I've seen, specifically him running quick outbreakers and comeback routes, I really like how he snaps off those routes. There's a weird dichotomy between him being very reliable hands in college and then some of those like kind of like catching technique leading to drops in the NFL where he'll like let it get into his body. For anyone who hasn't seen your video, I recommend it. It talks about some of his weaknesses. For the role he'll be asked to play, I like him. He has some inside outside versatility. You can get him free releases. I think he can play in motion. Now, I did watch a couple snaps where he was like getting end arounds and they looked really bad. I don't know if he could develop a little bit into that gadget role because you think he has the skill set for that. And then running clear outs, I like him. So yeah, if he can just make his hands a little more reliable and then run those clear outs with some juice rather than coasting, I think that's a huge problem I see around the NFL. And the players who do it well really make some of those long developing pass concepts work. For an example of that, the Houston Texans. Noah Brown running like a shot out of a cannon on these clear outs, and then Nico Collins and Tank Dell are just getting space to operate. So I think he'll be asked to do that at times, and I trust that he will be able to do. From what I heard, he was basically a malcontent because they didn't gift him the wide receiver 2 job. I think now that he has better scenery, that'll be conducive to his performance.
Yeah, so moving on to the rest of the receivers, I have Britton Covey as a lock. Some people might have him kind of as a bubble player up in the air. I just think his punt return ability kind of puts him as a lock on the team. He's been reliable enough to be the 5th receiver on this team as well. Just kind of, he's kind of been, a security blanket underneath this preseason for any of the quarterbacks that have been there. He's not taking the top off of defenses, but he's finding little spots in the zone to be there for checkdowns. I think that's something he can do for this team. I think Jahan Dotson coming to this team really put into jeopardy the vets on the team. So Paris Campbell and John Ross. I think the reason you go out and get a Jahan Dotson is because Paris Campbell didn't work out, because John Ross didn't work out. Johnny Wilson and Ainias Smith, even though they haven't had the best camps, they have they're under long-term contracts, so they're cheaper. They're going to be on the team you have rookie control on their contract for 4 years, as opposed to Paris Campbell's on a 1-year contract, same with John Ross, and they're older players as well. So I think for that reason, they're going to keep 6 receivers. I think it's going to be the two rookies they drafted, and Britton Covey in addition to the top 3 guys.
I agree. Earlier, if you asked people like a couple of weeks ago, everyone would say Ainias was going to get cut. Now, right away, a 5th rounder receiver when they were thin at the position already, getting cut sounded absurd. And from reports, he's been a lot better since then, so I think he will make it. Side note, I've heard from multiple beat reporters, specifically McMullen and PHLY, that Covey has impressed in practice, specifically generating a lot of separation on underneath routes. I'm intrigued to see what he can do on offense. We haven't really seen live reps of this. Is it true? I can't substantiate it based off what you see on punt returns. You'd think maybe he has that in him. Uh, now, so I also do think he's a lock just for special teams only, but in the future, I'd like to see if he has some offensive juice. So yeah, we're pretty much aligned. I said early on I thought Wilson would make it because they didn't have a backup X after Devontae Parker retired. Um, Now Dotson can play that. It's not ideal because he can only beat press with quickness. If he gets hands on him, he's toast. So Wilson has that ability, and also he's probably the best blocker outside of AJ that they have. And Kellen Moore specifically addressed this concern. A beat reporter said, "Hey, well, when you put Johnny Wilson out there, isn't it obvious you're going to try to use him as like a blocker?" And he's like, "We're going to be aware of our tendencies and specifically set up teams to counter our tendencies." So the reason I bring that up is because I didn't think they did that last year. I think they would bring in Gain. I mentioned this earlier in the offseason. They'd bring in Gainwell and Swift or Stoll, and it would kind of tip off what they were trying to do. I think Moore is a little bit more cognizant of self scouting in that sense. So I'm optimistic that they'll diversify their packages in a way that won't tip off what they're trying to do.
Yeah, moving on to tight end, I think they're going to keep two on the initial 53-man roster. I think they keep Dallas Goedert and Grant Calcaterra. Now, I think we've had a pretty good track record of stuff going on for most of the preseason. I think this is a position that at least I got completely wrong. I thought they'd be a little bit more set. I thought Albert O, could show a little bit more than what he's shown. I thought CJ Uzoma was going to be better as a blocker. He did not look good at all. He's already cut. I don't think anyone stood out enough. Like EJ Jenkins has made some plays, or these plays that I think. I don't think he's the type of player that you have to keep on an initial 53-man roster. I'm not even certain that they're not going to bring in someone else after initial cut day to see if there's some other tight end that's been dropped by another team that they can bring in. I think they're fine dropping any of these guys and then bringing back whoever comes back. None of them really stand out that much to me either way. Now, you kind of have to talk about a little bit practice squad rules. They're going to bring some of these guys back on practice squad. And when you bring him back on practice squad, you can call up one of these players to the 53-man roster up to 3 times on the year, and then you have to put him on the 53-man roster. So I think the Eagles are going to play that game somehow, trying to figure out who's going to be the third tight end for the team. And again, I wouldn't rule out them picking up someone else off the waiver wire. So, Eric, what are your thoughts? Do you think they're going with 2, 3? What do you have here?
Yeah, for a long time I thought 3, specifically because Kellen Moore likes 12 personnel. One guy goes down, now that's out the window. But there just doesn't seem to be 3 guys there to justify it. Uzama, like you said, he's pretty much gonna retire or something like this. Albert O, from what I heard, was injured, so I don't know if he could show his full capabilities. So maybe he goes to the practice squad or some kind of pup list. And then I do think they will look for like a third tight end who's a blocker, more of a blocker. But yeah, I will say this. McMullen said throughout the entire offseason that they would go with 2, and I was like, there's no way. I was highly skeptical of that because even the Chargers would run 13 personnel at times. I was like, well, now you need 3 or 4 tight ends. And there were times last year where they had 4 tight ends active. But the way it's shaking out, I got to admit, yeah, we probably missed the mark on tight end, and I think they will start with 2, and then, like you said, play the call-up game. I think, at least half the games they'll have 3 guys dressed, and they'll just play, do a bunch of shuffling with the practice squad, and maybe bring in another guy.
Yeah, and I think that talking about things Kellen Moore will do, when he was with Dallas, they would run multiple 2 running back sets. So you can kind of get creative and replace different guys around the formation around the offense. to be able to use different weapons on the team. Because if you think about how the team is best structured, going 13 personnel isn't the best structure for this team. It might be a situation where you're in pony personnel, where you got two backs and one tight end, AJ and Devontae on the field as well. It might be situations where you're in traditional 12 personnel. And also think about things that other teams are doing throughout the league, especially the 49ers, where they master using 12 or 21 personnel, but then they line up in spread formations. You know, they get you to come out in base packages, and then they spread you out. Is that something the Eagles could do with their roster if they're not able to find another tight end where they're comfortable doing, throwing in those plays of 13 personnel? Do they just switch it and now throw in plays of where you're using two running backs, things like that? Just getting creative in different ways, thinking about who's on your roster and what are their strengths. So, but moving on to offensive line. So at center, I think they keep three. I do think they keep Cam Jurgens and Brett Toth. Toth can move around. We've seen him play offensive guard. We've seen him play tackle as well this preseason. That versatility is really going to help them keep a player, help him to make the roster. I also think that Dylan McMahon is just not ready to start or to be a backup for this team. I think you'd really feel more comfortable having another primary backup. I thought Toth looked better than him this offseason or this preseason. So I think they keep three. And if it really came down to it, I'm not so sure I would keep Dylan McMahon on the initial 53-man roster. I'm only keeping him because he's under, he was a rookie draft pick this year, so you have 4 years of roster control on him. But I didn't think he looked good enough to say, yeah, he for sure is a lock to make the 53-man roster. What about you, Eric?
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, this is a predictive 53, not necessarily what we would do. Everyone who's closer to the team has put McMahon on their 53. So that consensus swayed me. So I have him on there. Now, instead of Toth, I have Hennessy because they went out and got him really early, and he has positional versatility. Now, he wasn't able to show anything in the preseason, so it makes sense why you cut him. And then obviously Jurgens. So
yeah, wow. So Hennessy he hasn't played. He's hardly played. I think he played a little bit in the first week. I think he played last week, but they were playing everyone last week. I just feel like they would have been putting him out there if he was going to make the team. But we'll see how that goes. At guard, Landon Dickerson, obviously Mekhi Becton. I think this is where things get a little interesting. I think they keep Trevor Keegan. I think Tyler Steen goes to the injured reserve. That's something I would do, and I think that's something that the Eagles would do as well. And then that way you can sneak another guy on the roster. The reason why I would do this, because Tyler Steen wouldn't be able to play for the first 4 weeks of the season. I think Trevor Keegan looked good enough to, if you swapped him out, I don't think it's a huge difference. I don't think it's that noticeable. I think that says something a little bit about Keegan. I think that says something a little bit about Steen. So for that reason, I think, yeah, do you want your top backup at guard out there? Yes, but I didn't think he was so much better than Keegan that you have to have him out there, especially if you're going to be able to fit in someone else on this roster on the cut down day. So, Eric, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the whole offseason I said Steen would be the starter because, he got that locker room thing. He was a pretty high draft pick. Becton would be the tallest guard in NFL history. I was skeptical that would happen. Obviously, that's not come to fruition. So I agree with you. I think they'll IR Steen. And then, yeah, I think Keegan is reliable. I just want to talk about Becton briefly. One of the things I mentioned was if they thought this guy had a ton of talent, well, if he was going to play tackle, then either he was going to leave next year or you're going to have to pay him big money. And I was like, man, that seems like such a lost opportunity. Now you put him in at guard, maybe they can return, keep him long term, and you have a really good player out of nowhere. And they could presumably keep him for a lot less money than if he was like their franchise tackle. So I'm very I guess if it turns out that Becton plays well, I'm very happy about that situation. And yeah, and then once Steen returns, now you have pretty good depth there because both those guys will now be able to play guard or tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. The multi-positional versatility there between Steen and Becton being able to play guard and tackle is huge with this roster construction. With Becton, I agree that he may be here long term if he does have a good year. Now, I will say this. I do want to see how he looks in pass protection. I think in the run game, he's going to move guys. This offensive line is massive. I think they're just going to absolutely open up giant holes for these backs to run through. I'm a little more skeptical in pass protection. I want to see how he moves. How's the leverage issues going to be being that tall? Is he's a little slow footed? It's just you're not going to be as quick when you're a guy that's that tall and also that big, that weighing 360 something pounds. I do want to see how he is moving laterally and against some of the quicker defensive tackles. We should see that pretty early in the season. We'll get to see him go against Kalijah Kancey. That's about as quick as you're going to see out of defensive tackles. So it'll be interesting to see that.
Yeah, that what a matchup that is. Kancey is like probably one of the quickest defensive tackles in history, and Becton is one of the slowest footed. But if he gets his hands on him, he'll completely erase him. So I'm gonna be excited to watch that tape. Yeah, that's intriguing.
Yeah, it's like a boxing match, One guy's got the length, the other guy's got the quickness. Who can win? All right, moving to offensive tackle. To me, I think this is clear cut. Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata, and Fred Johnson. I don't think they keep any more than that because of what we talked about with Mekhi Becton and Tyler Steen having guard tackle versatility. Did you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree.
Okay, moving to defense. I think this is where it gets a little bit more fun. There's a lot of decisions to be made on the defensive side of the ball. So we'll start with edge. Edge rushers, I have Josh Sweat, Bryce Huff, Brandon Graham, Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, and I think they keep a sixth. I would keep Teron Jackson. Anyone that's been following me, in the YouTube videos or on Twitter knows that, my camp crush this year is Teron Jackson. I do think the Eagles will keep Patrick Johnson, and we can discuss this a little bit more. But more importantly, I think Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt not necessarily being ready, especially Nolan Smith. I think you watch him on film and he just doesn't look like a guy that you're that comfortable throwing him out there. At least on passing downs, he's behind there as a run defender. He's all right, a little more than all right, but I don't think them being far enough along has warranted just keeping 5 edge rushers. I think you need to keep a 6th, especially when I think that collectively as football players, I think Teron Jackson and Patrick Johnson are just ahead of where Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt are as football players right now. Eric, what are your thoughts?
So you have Jackson and Johnson making it?
No, excuse me. I just have Jackson. I think the Eagles will keep Johnson.
If
it were me making the decision, though, I would keep Teron Jackson. I think the Eagles are keeping Patrick Johnson.
Oh, okay. I totally agree. From what I've heard, Michael Clay loves Patrick Johnson. So just for the special teams role specifically, I think they'll keep him. Now, I will say, the entire offseason, I was persuaded by beat writers that would be the case for Job. Job is a lock to make it because he's a special teams ace. Now everyone's cutting him. So what happened to that? So yeah, I'm in agreement. The interesting thing for me is it possible Hunt garners more snaps than we had previously suggested? Maybe not as a testament to Hunt, but as an indictment of how Nolan Smith's development has looked like. I almost tweeted that maybe the defensive staff just told Nolan Smith to bull rush the entire preseason because we hope he would have showed more moves. I mean, just a basic inside counter seems like it would be a huge boost to his game, and it's like, is that hard to learn? But that's something I'm interested in. I was very skeptical about Hunt when they drafted. I actually am quoted as calling him one of the rawest prospects for a third rounder I've ever seen. I have to watch more tape because the fan base at large seems very positive about him. He's way ahead of development. I can't substantiate that or say it's not true yet. Maybe, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in terms of who should I start with first? All right, so Jalix Hunt, I think he compared to Nolan Smith is a bigger player, much longer arms. You can tell instantly they pop off the screen, especially in run defense. I think he's just a better athlete overall. I know Nolan Smith ran a faster 40. I just see Hunt as just a better overall athlete, though. I think he's stronger. I think he's a little stronger than I expected coming out of college and kind of blooming into a bigger player. But and you can see the traits, you can see the quickness, all that stuff jumps off the charts. You can see the movement skills in space. That's better than Nolan Smith. I will say this though, he has a lot to work on. When you talk about Nolan Smith doing something other than a bull rush, that was Jalix Hunt. Jalix Hunt only did bull rushes, and I think that's something that the coaches are probably having him work on. Hey, let's figure out your fastball. Let's figure out your setup so that you can start throwing other moves. So maybe that's something that they're working on in the preseason. But his technique is just not very good at it. I'm going to come out with a video a little more in depth, reviewing these guys preseason, Nolan and Jalix in specific, kind of comparing them to Teron and Patrick. But his technique just has to get better. I didn't think he really flashed at all, and as a pass rusher. And the run game, he made some plays. There's a couple, like especially against the Patriots, there's a play where he got his hands on the chest of a tight end and was able to knock him back and get in and for a stop on a run play. There was another play where it was just one of those plays in preseason where backup players are playing and they don't do a very good job of double teaming on Jalix Hunt, and they give him free inside release, and then he quickly closes off the lane and gets a tackle. Against starting NFL caliber players, I don't think they just let him get inside action that easy. Nolan Smith, I think he's using more pass rush moves. They're just not very good. And part of it comes down to I don't think his play strength is very good. We compare him to Hassan Reddick. Reddick just played stronger than Nolan Smith does. He's also slow to get through his moves, and sometimes he doesn't finish his moves. So he's trying to do like a stab, club, rip, but he never rips. He just doesn't dip down, or he's very late to dip and rip under. He's just slow finishing his moves and not transitioning through everything. So it's just I think he is throwing more moves. I just think he's just not very technical with them right now. He's just very rudimentary, a little slow transitioning through the rush phase. So to me, it's a little concerning. When I watched Teron Jackson, there was a three pass rushes in a row from Teron Jackson the last game where he goes sets up with a stutter step and gives a little shoulder fake to make it look like he's about to hit him with an outside move. Opens up the tackle's chest. He sticks him with a long arm, bull rush, and he collapses the pocket. Next pass rush move after getting the tackle to think about the bull rush. Now he comes and hits him with a cross chop, finishes with a rip, almost gets a strip sack. Very next pass rush move after he's hit him with the outside move. Now he comes and hits him with an inside spin. All three plays, it was like the natural progression of a pass rush phase. He hits you with the power, hits you with the outside move, then hits you with the inside counter. And to me, that's a football player. That is a guy that's been working at his craft for a long time. I think Teron Jackson should make this team, but I understand if he doesn't. But he has played special teams. He did play special teams. He had a couple good plays this offseason, so he's not a guy that can't play special teams. He can drop in coverage too. And there's a play where he outraced Jeremiah Trotter from the middle of the field to force the quarterback to throw the ball away against the Patriots. He was faster. He was clocked at a faster time than Jeremiah Trotter on this play. So I think he's a guy that brings something to a football team. Whether it's the Eagles or not, I don't know, but I just had to get that off my chest.
So I never thought a second about Jackson until I watched your video on him, and then I started keying in on him, and I was like very impressed. I hope he makes the team. for the reasons we mentioned, we're a little bit skeptical that he will. Maybe we can get him on the practice squad and bring him up. But yeah, I like him.
Okay, let's keep the show moving. At interior defensive line, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, Moro Ojomo, or I don't know how you say his name anymore, but that's how I'm gonna say it until I hear him say it. Those are locks in my mind. After that, do they keep 6 defensive tackles? I think they keep at least 5. And if they only keep 5, what I would do is keep 5. I would keep Thomas Booker over Marlon Tuipolatu. I think Tui is just not as good, especially he's not as mobile. His foot quickness isn't as good as Thomas Booker. I think there's times where he can get reached, or if you're reach blocking him, he gets high pad level, gets knocked back. There's a couple plays. There's one play where he just got pushed into the lap of Zach Bond. Booker's had his fair share, his plays where he wasn't great as well, but I thought he did a better job recovering. I also think he does a better job penetrating on loops and stunts. And he had a number of plays where he flashed as a run defender as well. So in my mind, I think they keep 5 interior defensive linemen, and I think they keep Thomas Booker. I would keep Thomas Booker. Snap count wise, they kind of, if you're reading the tea leaves, it looks like it would be Marlon, but I would keep Thomas Booker.
Yeah. Okay. So what I saw from the pronunciation guide is it's Moro Ojama. So we'll see how they start pronouncing that on TV if he gets in. They had my Marlins made the roster a couple years now, so just for the familiarity, I think he will make it, and also Booker. So I actually think they'll keep 6. I admittedly didn't key in on Booker much, but I did talk to some beat writers, and they all said he has flashed repeatedly at practice. Pretty much every single one of them has him on their 53. Where there's smoke, there's fire. So I expect he will make it. Now, I haven't heard anyone talk about this guy, but I kind of like Mustipher. He's huge. And if you're playing like the gap and a half technique and you just want a guy who just sticks in there, it takes up space and it's hard to move, even against double teams at times. I kind of like Mustipher. He's probably a practice squad guy. I doubt he'll get claimed. So yeah, I hope he sticks around and sees, if he can develop a little better technique, a little more quickness, I think he's an NFL player for sure. So yeah, I'm going with the 6 I mentioned.
Yeah, and I'll throw this wild scenario out there. I don't think any of Tui, Thomas Booker, or PJ Mustipher are so much better or worse than each other that you don't just say, hey, we're going to put 4 through the initial 53 cut down, and then we're going to pick up whoever comes through the waiver wire at that point in time. I like Mustipher as well. I think all these guys have their warts. I think all these guys have their strengths as well. And I think I'd be fine with any of them. For that reason, I think you keep 5, and then you can get one of Tui or Mustipher to the practice squad, or Booker if they keep one of the other guys. So that's my thoughts there.
Real quick on that. There were times where the Dolphins last year with Fangio would dress 3 defensive tackles. So that kind of, if that trend continues on with the Eagles, it could lead credence to your theory that maybe they go thin and then pick up whoever kind of doesn't get claimed. There may not be a giant rotation at that position as they have done in the past.
Yeah, especially with they're kind of top heavy. There is a clear cut who are the best guys on this team, and it's Jalen Carter, tier, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, Moro Ojomo. So I think you'll see those guys are really going to steal most of the snaps anyways. Moving on to what's up?
I was gonna say Davis, when he has his full wind, he's only like 2 tiers below Carter, and he's a tier above Williams. But then when he's gassed, he's the worst player on the team. So the range of his play is just very dramatic. Yeah. So I will mention real quick, I think in a lot of 4-man front that Williams will be in there instead of Davis, and Davis will play in base more often, just because the pass rush chops, and you're facing 60+% passing now. So
Yeah, I think it'll be down dependent really. There's because there's still Jordan Davis can still tie up multiple defenders in the 4 down fronts, especially when he's a 2Y. It's a very important position in the defense. Really helps protect the backer behind them. And kind of how the defense has been structured, it's looking like Devin White's going to be the guy that would hang behind the 2Y mostly, and that's a big role for the defense. So on rundowns, I think Jordan Davis is going to play heavily, but there'll be a rotation. But moving on to linebacker, I think they've actually been a little bit better than we kind of expected coming into this season, at least in my eyes. I think they keep Zach Bond, Devin White, Nakobe Dean, Ben Van Sumeren, and Jeremiah Trotter Jr. I actually, I do think they keep Oren Burks now that I'm adding Steen to the injured reserve. That opens up a spot for one more person. I think he showed enough, and I think there are some question marks a little bit with his unit as a whole, even though I do think they played better than I expected. I do think there are some question marks a little bit that I think it's worth keeping Burks on the roster. So I would keep those 6. What are your thoughts, Eric?
Yeah, so I have 5 minus Burks. Now, if people recall, I predicted early on that Burks would maybe be the surprise starter, or not that he would start, but that it was possible. Then he pretty much missed the entire training camp, and only got action in the one preseason game, which I think puts a huge damper on his chances. Now, from people who watched it closely, they said he looked pretty good out there. He obviously has more experience than a lot of guys out there. 6 linebackers seems pretty extreme considering the percentage of nickel and dime we expect they'll play. Now, one thing we should mention is that, yes, you keep 53, but then you dress 48 on game day. So maybe they keep an extra 1 or 2 linebackers who don't end up dressing. Specifically, I'll talk about Van Sumeren. I've developed a football crush on this guy this offseason. I just love how he triggers downhill, and he's insanely fast to the ball. I haven't seen enough coverage snaps to say he's good enough in that department where he could be a starter, but in terms of just run fits and playing quick to the flats against running backs, maybe I'm crazy to say this, I think he's the best on the team. And he's a special teams ace. For that reason, there's no way that you want to put him through waivers and have a chance for another team to claim him. So I definitely think he'll be on the 53. I want to see more of Van Sumeren. I want to see him out there in the regular season. I want to see him play as a middle hook defender and see if he can show the same instincts that he does in run fits and coming upfield as he would be dropping back. Just real quick, do you have any insight on how he looks in coverage?
Yeah, so, and I'm going to go more in depth on this. In the Jahan Dotson video, I teased that I was going to put out a video covering the linebackers before the last preseason game. Then I realized I'm going to put this video out Friday night or Saturday morning. It's going to have a lifespan of about 4 hours, so why not just wait, watch the next game, get some more insight, and then put out another video. So that's going to be out very soon. But I think it was great that I did pause and watch that game, because Van Sumeren, you see so many plays where you're like, wow, this guy can be phenomenally good, a phenomenally good player, but I think he needs a little more simmering. I do think in coverage a little bit he gets lost. I think there are times even in run defense where he can be over aggressive and kind of overrun his gap, or not realize that the defensive lineman in front of him who's supposed to have the A gap got washed into his B gap that he's supposed to have, but he's still trying to keep his B gap, but not realizing that sometimes you got to morph with what's in front of you and just fall back into the gap where that defensive lineman got washed out of. There are times where he just kind of gets a little bit over aggressive on that stuff. But but there was some blown coverages and things like that. When you look at him and how he moves in coverage, his technique, the fundamentals of how he moves his feet on the ground, how he's deliberately shuffling and not just like hopping and galloping when he's like sliding back and forth. Those are all very impressive things. The way he's able to pivot and move and change directions, no one on this team can match it. And there's very few linebackers in the NFL that can match his movement ability, his first step burst, his long speed. He's a guy that if just let him develop, he can be an impact player in the NFL. So I'm excited for him in that regard. But I do think just getting to watch him play another game where he had to play a lot more snaps, I think you kind of see some of the reasons why he's not hasn't jumped some of these guys in the depth chart yet. I think you have to be in the right spots if you're going to play in the NFL, and he's not as reliable on that end. But I mean, next year, I think he's a guy that's really competing for the top spot. He's just got something that Jeremiah Trotter, Nakobe Dean can't bring. His athleticism, I think, is better than Devin White's. Zach Bond's a better athlete than Trotter and Nakobe Dean both, but he's not the same athlete that Van Sumeren is. So I like him. But I do think he needs a little bit more marinating on that end.
Yeah, one guy I would mention who had a fairly slow start to his NFL career in the mold of Van Sumeren is Blake Cashman, a linebacker who flies around the field. And then once he got coached up with D'Amico Ryans, he played a lot more sound and materialized into a very good linebacker and got paid big bucks this offseason. I think he's on the Vikings now. I hope that he could kind of have that similar maturation process because the physical tools are unbelievable. I mean, you and I both were watching all 22 all the time at all kinds of teams. There's very few linebackers in the entire NFL who move even remotely close to this guy. So if you can just chisel him a bit and around the edges where you mentioned some of his weaknesses are, I think you really got something.
Now, jumping to corner, as we're almost done with this, is I think they keep 5. I think it's Darius Slay, Quinyon Mitchell, Isaiah Rodgers, Keely Ringo, and Cooper DeJean. I think probably, most people are if someone keeps 6, I think it's a discussion between Eli Ricks and Josh Jobe. I've never really been the biggest Eli Ricks fan. I don't think he's someone that I'm, cutting people to keep on this roster. Jobe, I think I would only be keeping for special teams. But when you look at Tristan McCollum at safety, he plays special teams as well, and he has a much better chance to make an impact playing on this defense as well. So I think for that reason, if I had to go through and decide which special teams DB I'm keeping, it would probably be Tristan McCollum at safety. And for that reason, I'm going to keep 5 at corner. I'll also add in for Eli Ricks. In order for him to see the field, Darius Slay is going to have to get hurt. Quinyon Mitchell, he's going to need like 3 players to get hurt ahead of him before he's even in consideration at that point in time. So it's just, I don't think he's providing the depth that we expect. And especially having Avonte Maddox, who I think makes the team as well. That's even another guy that you add to that list as well. So I think for that reason, they keep 5.
Yeah, I have the exact same list. I just put Maddox down as a corner specifically because I have McCollum as the 4th safety. It's just semantics at that point. One of the ironic issues that the Eagles face is they now have a log jam at corner. It is a fact that a player who should be starting on X number of NFL teams will be on the bench or just in a small rotation at corner. It's probably going to be Ringo. So maybe I'll talk briefly about this. I've speculated that I think Mitchell will play a lot of slot. And then in more obvious rundowns, maybe they put Ringo then on the outside. And then on obvious pass downs, it will be Rodgers primarily on the outside. I have seen some people suggest that Rodgers would be on the bench. I don't think that has any chance of happening. So did you have any thoughts on that? Just like the actual depth chart for corner?
Yeah, so I think if they do something like that where they want to go, maybe they do want to keep Mitchell on the outside, but want to play nickel, like a big nickel. I'd be more inclined to put Sidney Brown in there because you're putting him in there for the reason explicit reason of you think we're at a higher percent chance that there's going to be a run play. Why not put the better run defender out there anyways? And after watching the game last week, I didn't think Cooper DeJean's run fits were crisp and on point. So I think, he's a rookie. He looks like a rookie playing his first game out there, playing really nickel in the NFL for the first time, so it's a bit of a different position than playing outside. So I didn't think his run fits were that great. I think Sidney Brown is going to be your better player playing that role. And when you're playing those packages on first down anyways, Fangio's more of a cover 3 type team coach as opposed to man coverage type coach. When he gets a third and short, then he's throwing out man coverage at that point in time. So I would go with a bigger package. I'd put Sidney Brown out there when he does get healthy, as opposed to putting Keely Ringo outside and then putting Quinyon in the slot. But just my thoughts. But I do think it's going to be Quinyon, Darius Slay, and base package. Then you put Isaiah Rodgers out there and move Quinyon to the slot at that point in time. Now moving to safety, I think they keep 5. I think they keep CJ, Reed Blankenship, Avonte Maddox. I do think they keep James Bradbury, and I'll touch on that in a minute. Tristan McCollum. I think Sidney Brown ends up on the PUP to start the year. The reason for keeping, first of all, Tristan McCollum, I think he's earned his way onto this roster. He's just, if contracts weren't a thing, you're keeping McCollum over Bradbury. He just is the natural safety. He is a better athlete. He is more willing to come down, willing and better to come down in the box to play the run or to make tackles in the flat. He's just a better overall player in coverage. You look at his brother, Zion McCollum, was a freak athlete. He plays corner for the Bucs now. I believe he's starting. Tristan McCollum, his brother, is a very good athlete as well. I don't think he's quite as good of an athlete as his brother, but he's an incredibly good athlete out there as well. And you saw him flying around the field on the final preseason game. James Bradbury in particular, though, I think when you look at the contract and what happens, and if you were to cut Bradbury this year and how that affects next year's cap space, and looking at the fact that if you look at SpotRec today after the Jahan Dotson trade, they're currently projecting him with 9 point something million dollars in cap space. They don't have a whole lot of moves they can really do to open up more cap space. Actually, signing Josh Sweat to a long-term deal would probably be their best move to opening up more cap space next year. There's not a lot of moves that they can make to open up space. So if you cut James Bradbury this year, that reduces their cap space that they have to work with next year by $7 million. $7 million you might not think is that much, but when you think about the way that Howie Roseman structures contracts for free agent players or players that he's giving extensions, this is who you could get. Listen to these first year deals for players the Eagles signed this offseason. Saquon Barkley, his first year was $3.8 million cap hit. Bryce Huff, first year of the deal, $4.35 million cap hit. CJ Gardner-Johnson, first year, $2.68 million. So by keeping James Bradbury on the roster this year, you could go out and sign Saquon or CJ next year, an equivalent of those type of players, or CJ and Bryce Huff, equivalent of those players. On a year where you're going to be tight with cash and cap space that year, I think it makes sense to keep Bradbury, especially what's your alternative, right? So think about it this way. Am I cutting James Bradbury so I can put and keep Eli Ricks on the roster, but I'm sacrificing signing CJ Gardner-Johnson and Bryce Huff? Is it worth it at that point in time? I think the right move is to keep James Bradbury on the roster and to think about this long term.
Yeah, I agree. I want McCollum to make it. I don't have a good feel if he would make it through waivers. He played pretty much the entire game, and like the tape, he pops off the tape, so that could attract someone's attention. He's way better than Bradbury, in my opinion. I mean, one of the things people talked about is, Bradbury always has an up and down year, and he cycled that throughout, but now it's just down the rest of his career. He's just can't move. It's a problem, and he's not like an ace tackler. Whereas, like McCollum, like you mentioned, he's coming in like a rocket ship, and he does seem like he does, maybe has a little bit of that Sidney Brown in him where he's over aggressive, but if you're like the back of the roster safety, I'd much rather you lean towards that side than be the ultimate safe like backup 50 yards guy. So yeah, I hope he makes it. My guess is Maddox would be the third safety. He would be like, if let's say CJ or Blankenship went down, he would be the first guy to fill in. Then probably Bradbury, but I would pick McCollum just because Fangio would likely trust Bradbury more in a spot like that. Did you have any thoughts on the depth chart for safety?
Yeah, I think it's until Sidney Brown gets back, I think it is Avonte Maddox as the next guy up. And really, I know they're saying James Bradbury above Tristan McCollum, but I just don't know how you can watch the tape and say, yeah, James Bradbury would be the next guy up over Tristan. It's just hard for me to believe that. Are they just trying to play it safe and maybe, kind of not put James Bradbury at the bottom of the depth chart, and then that way maybe someone trades for him or something like that? I don't know. But even if someone trades for him, that doesn't alleviate their cap issues. You still have to pay that guaranteed money. Almost nothing changes if you were to trade him away in terms of the cap hits. It's almost the same exact thing, and it would be like cutting him this year. So I don't even know if a trade is something they'd want to do, just based on what you'd even get back for James Bradbury if someone were to trade for him. But I don't know.
Oh, I want to talk about Ricks real quick because I skipped over him. I always think he stinks. I don't think he'll make it. I do think they could get a 7th rounder for him. I'm very intrigued by the possibility of the Cowboys trading a 7th rounder for him. Bland just went down for like maybe almost half the season. And one of my favorite things is trading bad players to your rival teams. Now, you mentioned this. That could be the case for Dotson. Maybe there are things we don't know about him. I don't know if it's injury. I don't know if he's bad in the locker room. There's a million things it could be. Everyone did find it odd that the Commanders were willing to trade a seemingly good player. Now, here's my opinion. The price they paid was appropriate. So it's not like they were giving him away for peanuts. They got a solid pick for that. Maybe no other team was willing to give a pick for that. Almost every team in the NFL had a wide receiver 3 that was better than the Eagles. So it may have just happened organically. But that remains to be seen. So yeah, I'm hoping that we can trade Ricks for something.
Yeah, and I wouldn't rule out trades to round out the rest of this roster, especially maybe something at tight end. Maybe they do see they want to add a little depth somewhere, maybe edge rusher. I think I'd think it's hard pressed to upgrade from the 2 guys that they might cut, and Bron Jackson and Patrick Johnson, but who knows what's out there. But having said that, that's going to wrap up our podcast. We did skip over Jake Elliott, Braden Mann, and Rick Lovato to round out the final 3 guys on the 53-man roster, but I think that was a given. But we'll see how this plays out, and as always, we're probably going to be wrong on some of these, but those are the things that we would do. But either way, this is shaping up to be a fun season, and so we're excited to see who makes the roster, who makes the practice squad, and who is going to be running out there for week 1 against the Packers. So make sure to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the podcast, and until next time, go Birds.